Okay, so you taught a lesson in math over subtracting fractions, and the lesson went pretty well, except for you messed up a little bit on the teaching because you were following the Engage New York worksheet, and then you figured out that didn't work so well, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst lesson you've ever taught and 10 being the best lesson you've ever taught, where do you feel like this one falls?
I feel like this would be between 4 or 5, maybe. It's probably not the worst lesson I've taught, but I would definitely say it's not the best.
Okay, what pleased you about this lesson?
I think what pleased me is after the end of the lesson, the students were actually able to complete at least 4 to 5 questions independently, accurately.
Okay, so I mean that does kind of maybe push the lesson up to like a 6, because I know with this group, you're kind of like, sometimes you can't get to that. It's basically like you have to do the whole worksheet with them. So maybe that pushes it a little bit higher just because you were able to actually get them to do something. What would you change the lesson to move it closer to a 10?
If I was to change the lesson or to go back and reteach the lesson, I would probably include some type of graphic organizer with a number bond, a blank number bond on there, to where the kids could actually go in and fill it out, as opposed to having to draw it to decompose the number to be able to subtract effectively.
Okay, so just a little bit more guidance on the worksheet so that they could have a little bit more of like a scaffold to help them move through the worksheet.
Yes.
Okay. You're going to add your graphic organizer. Can you kind of show me what that would look like?
The strategy that we've used this year is called a number bond. And the number bond is basically when you are decomposing a number. And I've used this for whole numbers, for fractions, for a lot of different skills. And so for this specific lesson, you are subtracting a fraction from a mixed number. So for example, if I had the problem 5 1/8 minus 7/8. What I was planning on doing is giving the kids like a blank graphic organizer like this and teaching them that when you have a fraction that is 1/8 minus 7/8, you cannot subtract the 7 from the 1. You don't have enough to subtract. So what you would have to do is you would have to decompose this mixed number. So the way that you would decompose it is you have 5 1/2. There's a couple of different ways that you could decompose this one. What I would show possibly for this one is how could I make 5 wholes in reference to 8s. So this is one way you could do this. If I was going to do that, I would say, okay, 8/8 would show me 1 whole. So what would 5 wholes of that look like? It would be 8/8 plus 8/8 plus 8/8 plus 8/8. So they could add those. Or a faster way would be to multiply. So 5 times 8 is 48. So that is also equal to 5 wholes. Mm-hmm. Then I could break this apart and I still have 1/8 left over. These are going to be combined to show an improper fraction. So I have 48 and 1/8. You combine them by adding the numerator, and the denominator stays the same. Now I have enough to go back and subtract from the original number. So I could go back and subtract 7/8. So then I would show the students that I'm basically just subtracting the numerator. So 41 minus 7. They would have to go and borrow a 10, which this would become an 11. 11 minus 7 is 4. And then you would have 3. So you would have 34/8, which that is an improper fraction. Typically, I have the kids go back and change that into a mixed number. So therefore, they would still need to go back and use this strategy of a number bond to decompose that. And eventually, like I said, I would have these blank number bonds on a graphic organizer, just multiple of them, so that we could use them for the same problem or other problems. So I'm going to go back and pull out 8. So I would show the kids an easy way to pull out 8, kind of like what we did here, is you're going to be skip counting. So I have 8/8, next, 16/8, 24/8, and 32/8. And that's as close as I can get to 34/8. So that is 1 hole, 2 holes, 3 holes, 4 holes. If I have 32/8, I'm going to subtract that from the 34. So 34 minus 32 is 2. So that's where you would get your numerator here. So then the answer is 4 holes and 2 eighths.
Yeah, and hopefully by that your kids would realize they wouldn't have to do 48s, that they could pull out the 5, which would be the same thing, or they could have done like a 4 and a 7 or 9/8.
They could. And that's one other way I was going to show. This is one strategy that you could use. You could also use that number bond to do that same problem. Just another example. If I have 5 and 1/8 minus 7/8, I like what you were saying. You could actually just take apart and decompose that 5.
Mm-hmm.
Here we're going to decompose the 5 into wholes and 1 fraction whole.
Yeah.
So then you would show the kids that would be equal to 4 holes and 8 eighths, because that 8 eighths is equal to a whole.
Surely they would make that. With the number bond, that would probably help them make more connections. And that's probably what you want with this class too. It's harder to make, you can tell that for them, it's harder to make the connections.
Yes, it definitely is. And the less steps, because I feel like that's where they get lost, is the first one maybe that had too many steps. So this probably would be a more effective strategy, which you would add that 1/8 back to that 8 eighths. And then you would have 4 holes, and that's 9 eighths, which that 9 eighths is going to give you enough to be able to subtract that 7 eighths. So this way is actually a more effective strategy, which sometimes when you're teaching, a lot of the times you run into this in the middle of the lesson, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I need to go back and either reteach or remediate. But same way, you would just subtract here, 9 minus 7, and that would be 4 and 2 eighths. So you can obviously tell that strategy was a lot more faster and less steps than the other one.
Yeah, with a higher class, you could probably start with this, but since you tried that, you're going to have to maybe move backwards with the number bonds. Okay,
Yes.
I think that's a good plan. And I think you could measure that change probably by just seeing how it went after you tried it to see if it was more effective. So do you want to make that your goal?
Yes, because I really want the kids to be able to consistently be able to subtract a fraction from a mixed number, and I want them to be able to do that consistently. So I feel like if I was to scaffold the instruction with a number bond sheet, that they could actually practice that multiple times before they would have to be expected to do it independently without that graphic organizer.
Yeah, that would be a good way to measure. So if they are able to do it with the graphic organizer, but then have some practice without the graphic organizer, that would really help. So what are your next steps?
I plan even today in my lesson, because this lesson was actually taught yesterday, to provide them with that graphic organizer and to show them how to use it effectively. And we're going to do that today. And then the following day, what I will do is kind of like a slow, gradual release. The kids that can effectively use that graphic organizer say, hey, can you draw that on scratch paper? Because that's me teaching them a strategy to be able to use that graphic organizer still, but not be given it on a sheet of paper, because that's a good strategy for them to use when they have scratch paper, even on a state assessment.
Okay. So I think just start with the graphic organizer and then move to drawings to help them in the future.
Yes.
Okay. That sounds like a good goal to me.